I would like to share a personal experience that I had in my childhood home in the early 90s when I was 6 years old. This isn't the first experience, and it definitely wasn't the last, but it is the only time I ever truly saw her. A quick backstory. The house is a brick colonial built by one of the very first families to settle outside of Philadelphia. They were a very affluent family who owned a large portion of land in the area and worked in the city. The house was lived in by their descendants well into the early 1900s. So as you can imagine, a lot of history, births, and deaths going on within those walls. As a child I suffered from nightmares, a lot of them. It was commonplace for me to wake up in the middle of the night, jarred awake by some terrifying dream, and this time was no different. On this particular night I had awoken from a scary dream, and in order to calm myself down I laid quietly in my bed and scanned the dark corners in my bedroom for some unknown threat. I have no idea what I expected to find, but I definitely remember the feeling of what could be hiding here in the shadows. As I looked around, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary at first, but then all of a sudden, there she was, standing in my doorway, staring directly at me. Her face was emotionless. She was very beautiful, with shoulder-length brown hair that had large waves towards the bottom, and she was wearing a long white nightgown. Forgive me for the cliché, but that is what she was wearing. I stared at her in shock and confusion, and she just stared back. I didn't understand what was happening, but what I did know was that there was a woman in my house in the middle of the night whom I did not recognize, and she was looking right into my eyes. She was clear as day, as if somebody was just standing there, watching over their child as they slept. The wheels in my head were turning, and all I could come up with was, this person should not be here. The next thing I remember doing was throwing the covers over my head with my heart racing and thinking over and over, please go away. I have no idea how long I hid under the covers, but when I emerged she was gone. From what my mother tells me, I didn't tell her right away what had happened. I think she said I told her a couple days later that I saw a woman in the house. From that point onwards, and even to this day, when I visit my parents, who still live there, you bet that door is shut. Friends ask me how on earth I could live there. The way I see it, her presence has never been malicious, and she lived there first, so it is just as much her house as it is mine if she chooses to stay. She does seem to have a sense of humor though. I thought about saving that story for a different day, but it does directly correlate to the original, so I will add it if anyone is interested in reading further. Fast forward to last summer. I was back home for a short time helping to run the family business, which is also on the same property in a separate building. The topic of hauntings came up with one of the employees I have grown close with. I told her that we have a resident ghost in the family home, and told her the story that I just told here. She jokingly said to remind her never to come over to visit. I reassured her that it wasn't that bad and that I personally hadn't experienced anything recently when I visit, and even made a joke that perhaps she had moved out. We laughed and that was the end of it, or so I thought. That very same evening, I came downstairs to ask my mother something and found that I was alone in the house. The property is pretty large, so it is not uncommon to be around and not know where the person is. I went into the kitchen and found some almonds to snack on. Just then I felt like someone was in the house. I figured it was my mom coming back in, and I checked around the corner and there was no one. I called out to her and received no response. It was strange, but I shrugged it off and went back to snacking. I had my back to the entrance to the kitchen and I was just sort of standing there, staring out the kitchen window daydreaming. That is when I felt it. Someone poked me on the back of my arm. It was a playful poke, the kind you do when you sneak up behind someone and tap them to get their attention. During the time it took me to turn to see who was there, I remember wondering who it could possibly be. My parents are not people who sneak up behind others and poke them, lol. It was no one. No one was there. I fully expected someone to be standing there, so when there wasn't I was so taken aback that I let out a startled yell, and power walked straight for the front door and left the house. The feeling I had was like reality slapped me in the face. I am completely convinced it was her, giving me a playful nudge saying, "Guess who is still here?" That really freaked me out. I can handle little things here and there, but being physically touched, no thank you. Anyway, that is all for today. Thanks for listening.